Welcome to this episode of SCI Coffee Conversations, where we are catching up and chatting with people that have been a part of SCI's community building story over the past 20 years. And with me today is Marisa Luse, who definitely goes way back early in our 20-year history. So I'm very excited to have you talk to us about your early role, helping to start the SCI Dorchester program and not all the things you've been up to since then, that would take too long, but some of the highlights since your time as an SCI staff member. So good morning, Marisa.
Good morning, David. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well here. And my first question, the reason I start with it is when we were starting SCI initially in Woburn, and I know the same was pretty true when you were doing this similar process in Dorchester. It started with a lot of informal conversations over coffee or other such beverages that people like to enjoy at coffee shops. And so I'm curious, if we were meeting in real time at a coffee shop in Dorchester, what would you be drinking? What's your favorite go-to drink in the morning or to get
My
you?
favorite go-to drink is tea. But recently, so I'm a tea connoisseur, but recently I had the blooming halo tea, which the
Oh,
flower will bloom when it's sitting in hot water for a while, and it's so tasty. So it's my favorite. It's like my favorite beverage right now.
ooh, that sounds pretty
Morning tea.
tasty. Yeah, that sounds great. I did recall correctly. I thought it was going to be tea for you. I wouldn't have guessed the Halo tea. I'm definitely mix in some tea, but definitely more coffee. In fact, I'm probably ready for cup number two pretty soon, but not
I
before
feel
we
like
have.
I need coffee now. I do.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, it's a rainy day, and just I don't know. In these times, I think some kind of caffeinated beverage sometimes comes in handy. But
Mhm.
anyway, this isn't just a chat about beverages that we enjoy in the morning, but want to talk about SCI and community building and your experience. So I guess where I want to start with, as in the intro, I did say as setting you up that you were led and started our SCI Dorchester program. But even rewinding before that, what attracted you to that role? That we were a barely known fledgling organization, and what led you to apply and say this is what the work I want to do?
Mm. Well, what really interested me in SEI was two things. One was the work. So this whole concept of social capital was very intriguing to me. I wanted to understand what that word meant. And two, the location. So growing up in the city of Boston, I really loved working in neighborhoods of Boston. So what attracted me was the fact that I was living in Dorchester and being able to do work in my community was something that really attracted me to the work.
That's great. And similarly, my story starting the organization Woburn, it was moving back to a place that I call home because it's interesting. I've been in the nonprofit sector for a while, and you may have had this experience too, that there's definitely a lot of folks, and nothing wrong with it, but it's definitely different when you're doing nonprofit work in one place, and then going home somewhere else. When you start doing the work in a place that you call home, it just takes on another level of meaning, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. And I think, it's interesting. The term social capital was relatively new at the time. I think part of why you thrived in the role is the term might have been new, but I think you're an instinctive community builder. And the being with SCI gave you a platform for it, and B,
Mhm.
maybe a slightly fancier term for stuff you kind of, I think, innately did. And so we were able to get a lot done in Dorchester under your leadership. What is an accomplishment or a moment that sticks with you from that work in SCI Dorchester?
Um, there's several, but we don't have a lot of time for that. But I think, again, two things. One is around our community breakfast, that first community breakfast lunch that we had after having so many conversations in the community about one, SCI. In the formation of SCI Dorchester and getting a lot of input from the community in terms of how the organization could be a resource, right? Two was also our first cohort of AmeriCorps members. This is
Mhm.
something that I speak about all the time. I'm very proud of that first cohort because it was one of the most diverse cohorts that we ever had. I mean, we had folks who had just graduated high school, all the way to those who were wanting to make transitions in their lives and in terms of their careers. So we had folks who were like in their 50s and approaching their 60s in the program. So I felt really proud about that.
Yeah, that was a great group. And that SCI breakfast, I can remember it's like that thing of you do the work, you have the conversations. You hope when you send that invite out and you have a big space, like I think it was in the gym at Dorchester House.
Yeah,
Mayor
yeah.
Menino was there, our
Mayor Menino was
speaker,
there. Yeah.
and at least when Marisa builds it, they do come. The room was packed, and despite the early hour, so definitely. And it wasn't just the coffee that got them there, although it didn't hurt.
Right,
Great.
right.
Yeah, that's great. I know one thing I should touch on actually before I wanted to, one thing that's maybe worth noting because I think it's kind of interesting. Maybe if you want to talk a little bit, I know about our key partners. We were partnering with health centers there. I don't have any thoughts because I think we still are thinking about even these days in a little different way, but just how sort of social capital building and how that relates to some work that community health centers do. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think that one, community health centers are not just, providing, the medical support, to patients, right? They are also providing a whole wide range of services, right? And really looking at the holistic approach to healthcare. And so I think that, the work of social capital is so important in that, right? It's not only social capital is really about knowing your neighbors and, engaging in your community. And health centers are the hub to many communities. And so it's important that they really understand the needs of the community, but the community is also a part of helping to shape what some of those answers to those needs are. And so that's where I feel like that there is that connection to the work and also the challenge of the work.
Yeah, great. I figured I'd bring that in because we are even to this day tying in with health issues since in various ways, especially in the pandemic, including having vaccine equity initiatives. So there have been a few issues that have been like common threads throughout the years, changed, tie in public health and certainly youth work being another. So great. Anyway, sorry to throw that curveball at you. I was going to ask you about that, but I want to talk about. I love your LinkedIn, your keywords on LinkedIn. You describe yourself as a relationship builder, community advocate, and civic leadership and responsibility champion. Without giving us all the work you've done since you left the SCI staff position, give me a sense, a flavor for some of the work you've been doing and how it might have built upon or been similar to some of the work you did with SCI.
Well, I really credit the work of working at SCI with everything that I've done since then, because it really gave me a framework for really understanding how I wanted to show up in the world as a leader and as a champion. And so for me, whether it's been working in higher education or whether it's been working on community health issues in our community, the importance of really building intentional relationships and that really meet people where they're at, but that also just really connects around just creating space for people without an agenda, without any intended goals, and just being in community with each other. And that step I find is the most important step, and sometimes a misstep. Right. So, so I feel like SCI has really contributed to me being able to slow down, because when we were reading Bowling Alone, and I was like, all this data is just centered around the fact that we can't people don't feel comfortable, going to their neighbor and asking them for a cup of sugar or whatever their needs may be. And I'm like, this is powerful stuff. So I think, to me, that emphasized the importance of making sure that you're creating space in that you are building relationship and being intentional about that. So I hope that answered the question.
That's great. I heard 3 words there. I mean, there were more than 3 words, but 3 key themes like space, intentionality, or the intention, and slowing down, like the idea that it takes time. And those are all things that all 3 of those elements aren't always there in community work, nonprofit work, because it is often a rush. Oh, we've got a deadline, we've got an event, and you don't sometimes create the space or take the time. So I've never actually heard people exactly say slowing down, but that as a way of thinking about it. But you do kind of have to slow down if you're focusing on relationships, because relationships don't, you don't
and
just
you're focusing on making a difference, right? Yeah. You do, and there's such great assets in our community, and you'll get to learn who they are, and the universe always provides. So that's why I think it's important to slow down.
Yeah, great. I love that. So I've referenced you've obviously done other work for your day job since the days with SCI, but we brought you back as a board member, recruited you to our board of directors a couple years ago. So you clearly still have that commitment to the organization in a new angle. So what do you see? Obviously we face a lot of challenges today, some the same probably as what we faced maybe back when we were starting SCI 20 years ago, but obviously some new challenges. Why do you think SCI's mission is still important, or even particularly important related to challenges we face today?
Well, as you mentioned, we've just come out of a pandemic, and we realized that a lot of the infrastructure, the services and resources that were available were failing us during a very critical time. And so in order for us to really be able to kind of rebuild but also kind of but also use these as opportunities for learning and growing, it is important for us to really embrace these principles of building social capital and increasing civic engagement in our communities. We need each other, and more than ever. And in the work of SCI gives us the framework for being able to do that work. So when people are looking for models and they're looking for examples, they can look at SCI and to be their start, to help them be their starting point, and for it, because I think a lot of people, think that they have to have someone with credentials, initials behind their names to kind of answer some of these problems in our community. And no, we just really need each other, and we need those who are out there just volunteering, because a lot of the work of SCI is volunteering, and is getting involved and being plugged in and getting connected to your community. So it starts there, and I think SCI really provides that, really models that.
Great, well said. Thank you. The last thing I want to ask you to speak to, maybe to give maybe some practical tips and takeaways to folks listening or watching, is we have a relatively new tagline at SCI: cultivating connections, developing leaders, and strengthening communities. Actually, I forgot it's on my Zoom screen. So particularly thinking about that cultivating connections piece, because you've touched upon this a little bit already, but some tips from your experience both at SCI and elsewhere. How can people do more to really cultivate connections and cultivate those relationships in their communities?
Well, first is stop doing the same thing,
Hmm.
get out there, take some risks and meet new people and go into spaces that you haven't gone to before. So go to events that you haven't gone to, or volunteer with an organization that you haven't volunteered with. If your space has been working with young people, try connecting and working in the corporate world, or working with local businesses. Just do something different than what you already currently do, because you find that's how you cultivate relationships. It's easy for us to do the same thing, meet the same people, but you're really not going to grow, and then you're not going to also maybe tap into opportunities for that will strengthen yourself, but also be a benefit to your community. So I would encourage that, and I think that it is also thinking about how these relationships can be beneficial to thinking about how these relationships can be beneficial to your communities, right? And so and I think that that's important, because you'll be able to really think about like what the needs are, and then how you would like to, what the outcome that you're looking for in that relationship, right? Those would be probably two of the tips that I would give.
All right. Great tips. A lot of wisdom in a short period of time. Marissa, so great to catch up with you. And I know folks will enjoy hearing some of your experience and wisdom on the topic of social capital. So thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me. This was great.